It happened the same afternoon my lemon bars got pushed behind a tray of ribs, as if that was the worst thing that would happen to me that day. We were at my husband Ethan's family home for their annual 4th of July barbecue. The setup was as picturesque as ever. Folding tables covered in blue checkered cloths, a cooler overflowing with soda and IPAs, Gail, Ethan's mother, circulating with her signature sangria, and his sister Elise loudly retelling stories that somehow always ended with someone else looking foolish. Usually, me. The heat was sticky, but the tension I carried was colder than anything in that cooler. I stood quietly beside the patio table, refilling the lemonade pitcher, watching people mill around like we were one big, happy family. But I knew better, because this time I wasn't just an outsider, I was the target. If you've ever been the one who keeps quiet while everyone else laughs at your expense, you're not alone. Subscribe to Revenge with Seren, because sometimes silence tells the whole story. 7 years I'd attended these cookouts. 7 years I'd smiled at jokes I didn't find funny, helped clean up while others disappeared, and tried to blend in so hard I sometimes felt translucent. Elise always joked that I was too serious, too sensitive, or my favorite, the quiet wife. I used to let it roll off my back, but lately, it wasn't rolling. It was seeping, deep. Ethan was behind the grill, tongs in one hand, phone in the other, texting someone. I assumed a coworker, though I'd stopped asking months ago. His shirt was slightly damp with sweat, his sunglasses reflecting back the crowd. I remember thinking, he looks like a guest in his own marriage. I barely noticed Elise approaching until her voice rang out, slicing through the music and chatter. "If she disappeared tomorrow," she said, grinning, "I swear none of us would even notice." There it was. The laughter erupted like she'd just said the cleverest thing in the world, and what gutted me most wasn't her voice. It was Ethan's silence. He kept flipping ribs like he hadn't heard a thing, not even a glance, not even a, "Hey, that's enough." I stood there, lemonade pitcher half poured, and for a split second I thought, did that really just happen? And if you've ever frozen in public trying to swallow the sting of betrayal, subscribe. You deserve to hear stories that validate your silence. No one came to my defense, not Gail, who I once helped nurse through surgery, not Ethan's cousin Melissa, who borrowed my dresses and never returned them, not even Ethan himself. They just kept talking, laughing, eating. I placed the pitcher down on the table, wiped my hands on a napkin, and walked into the house. The guest room was quiet. Diamond soys. A faint hum from the ceiling fan was the only sound. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the full-length mirror on the closet door, trying to understand what I looked like in that moment, because for so long I had tried to look like someone who fit in, and suddenly I realized I didn't want to anymore. I wasn't part of this family. I was part of the background. A propriedad. There was a time when Ethan used to notice everything. When I'd wake up to coffee he brewed just the way I liked it. When he'd put a blanket over my shoulders during movie nights without me asking. When he'd squeeze my hand under the table if I was nervous in public. That man hadn't been around in a while. I splashed cold water on my face in the downstairs bathroom. The lemon bars I baked were still untouched on the corner of the kitchen island, slightly soft from the heat. Elise had brought store-bought cupcakes. Those were gone. I took a deep breath and stepped back outside, not because I wanted to return, but because I needed to see things clearly. I didn't want to feel like I left because I was weak. I wanted to leave because I was certain. I sat on the low brick garden wall near the back gate, legs crossed, cup of water in my hands. From there, I watched everything. Elise's voice rising again, kids chasing each other, Ethan still by the grill, occasionally raising a bottle of beer to his lips. I waited for him to notice me sitting alone. He never turned his head. That was the moment it happened. Not the insult, not the laughter, but the complete erasure of my presence. That was when I decided I would not spend another summer, another month, another day disappearing. By sunset, I had made my plan, but I didn't say a word. Have you ever been mocked out loud while the person who was supposed to protect you stood in silence? Tell me, did you stay longer than you should have? Portland didn't greet me. It absorbed me. The rain wasn't dramatic. It was constant, thin, soaking not just your coat, but your breath. The city felt gray in a way that got inside you, through bus seats, old sidewalks, secondhand stairwells. I arrived on a Thursday, checked into a shared hostel, bought a granola bar, a pen, and a spiral notebook, and I said almost nothing for the next 7 days. I moved like a whisper, took jobs that didn't ask for resumes, washed dishes, cleaned baseboards, filed logistics receipts until 3 a.m. in a medical warehouse where no one remembered my name shift to shift. No one knew me, and for the first time, that felt like safety. I started introducing myself by initials only, CR, no last name, no traceable link, just enough to sign a form, not enough to be found. I rented a room the size of a walk-in closet in a crumbling sixplex in Kearns. It had a rusted radiator, a cracked mirror, and a window that looked directly into an alley. But it locked. It didn't judge. And it let me be nobody. At night I wrote. Not paragraphs, not poetry, just fragments. Still here. Don't Google her. You're not the shame. I wrote them in a code I invented in middle school, a private alphabet I never shared. Letters no one else could decode. It became my way of bleeding without leaving evidence. Some nights I stayed awake so long I forgot what morning meant. The grief wasn't loud. It didn't cry. It pulsed. Quiet and hot, like a fever you hide until your body gives out. And then, one night, something shifted. I was mopping the floor at a pediatric clinic. My usual temp gig. Quiet, mechanical work. Around 11:30 p.m., the hallway doors burst open. A woman came running through, holding a crying child. She was speaking only Spanish, panicked and breathless. Behind her, a security officer barked in clipped English. "Firma aquí, just sign, it's protocol." The woman didn't move, didn't blink. She looked like a statue mid-collapse. And for reasons I still don't fully understand, I stepped between them. "She's not signing anything," I said, my voice low but steady. The officer frowned. "And who are you?" I looked him dead in the eye. "Her translator." A lie, but one I wore like a uniform. I took the clipboard. The forms weren't even current. They were from the previous quarter, with wrong dates and missing witness signatures. I handed them back. "These aren't valid," I said. "You'll have to try again." The officer muttered something under his breath and walked off. The woman didn't thank me. She didn't need to. She just held her daughter tighter and sat down on the hallway bench, shaking. 3 days later, I was called into an office I had never been in before. I thought I was about to be fired. Instead, a man in a soft wool blazer offered me coffee. His name was Rafael Delgado, director of Mosaic House, a nonprofit supporting undocumented families in crisis. "I heard what you did," he said. "Most people don't step in." I nodded. "Most people still have something to lose." He smiled. "We need someone like you, not to mop floors, to help." I didn't say yes immediately, but I didn't say no either. And that's how it began. At first, I filed intake packets, picked up lunch orders, sat quietly in back rooms while caseworkers debated grant deadlines. But I listened, harder than anyone. I started reading public policy books from the thrift shelf in Hawthorne. I watched how Raphael ran meetings. I studied the wording of funding appeals, the nuance of zoning laws, the loopholes in state protections. I kept my head down, but I never stopped collecting. One day a client hugged me. A woman who hadn't spoken above a whisper in 3 months looked me in the eye and said, "Gracias por quedarte." "Thank you for staying." I didn't reply. But something opened in my chest, like a window long painted shut. Months passed. I earned a certificate in community advocacy from an online legal aid program. I started drafting outreach letters, translating flyers, prepping grant applications. No one asked about my past. And I didn't offer it, because I wasn't hiding anymore. I was preparing. One night I painted. It had been years. The last time I held a brush was in college before everything fell apart. I painted a silhouette of a woman dissolving into shadow, but I added one streak of gold, just a sliver, running down the center. Not light, not a wound, a seam, holding her together. I hung it behind the curtain in my room. Nobody asked about it. That felt right. Portland taught me how to be invisible without being erased. And then one evening, I attended a community roundtable on housing policy. A state senator was giving remarks. I stood at the back of the room, hoodie pulled low, just listening. "Real justice," he said, "is built by those who've lived the consequences of silence." The crowd clapped. I didn't. I just wrote one line in my notebook that night. "One day I'll make silence a policy issue." That wasn't a threat. It was a mission. I didn't want revenge. I wanted structure. I wanted protection for the woman in the hallway, for people like me, for every story dismissed because the storyteller didn't have a title. I hadn't just lost a family, I had gained a reason. The hardest part wasn't leaving. It was staying. Waking up beside a man who barely touched me. Eating dinner across from someone who didn't ask how my day went. Folding laundry next to a husband who used to trace my spine with his fingers, now barely brushing past me like I was furniture. That's what no one talks about. The loneliness that blooms not when you're alone, but when you're still sharing a bed, still sharing a life, still wearing a wedding ring that feels more like a muzzle than a vow. I started sleeping later, just to avoid lying awake next to him. Some nights I waited until he drifted off, then crept out to the couch. I told myself it was the heat, or the fan noise, or my insomnia. It wasn't. It was the ache of pretending we still had something to fall asleep inside of. That week after the barbecue, I noticed everything sharper. The way he never looked up when I entered the room, the way he scrolled through his phone at dinner, the way his mother texted him daily but never included me in the group thread anymore. We were unraveling. Not with a bang, but with a shrug. One night, around midnight, I got out of bed, padded down the hall in silence, and opened my laptop. I had a folder called Travel Ideas from years ago, back when Ethan and I used to dream of going to Seattle, to Vermont in the fall, maybe even Croatia. I used to collect links, hotel photos, little itineraries we never followed through on. They were still there, untouched. That night, I deleted the whole folder. And then, without thinking too hard, I opened a new tab and searched short-term sublets for one. The results came fast. A small apartment above a florist's shop, month to month. A converted garage with a kitchenette and exposed brick. A lakeside cabin 45 minutes outside the city. No internet, but peace. That last one made me pause. No Wi-Fi, no noise, just stillness. It terrified me and called to me at the same time. I bookmarked it. I didn't book it yet, but I needed to know it was real. That escape wasn't just a metaphor, that there was a version of my life where no one interrupted me, laughed over me, or looked past me, where the air was mine. The next day, Ethan came home from work and said his sister Elise had invited us to a birthday dinner. Her son was turning 5. "She said it would be nice if you came," he said, barely glancing up from tying his shoes. "Nice if I came. Not, she'd love to see you. Not, we're invited. Just, if you came." I stood there for a moment. He didn't even notice my hesitation. I said, "Tell her I won't be able to make it." He blinked. "Why not?" "I'm busy," I said simply. He didn't ask with what. Didn't even press. Just nodded and went on tying his shoes. That was the moment I realized he wasn't even curious about my absence anymore, which meant I didn't owe him explanations for the distance I was creating. I started taking small walks after dinner, 10, 20 minutes, no destination, just movement. I'd walk past homes with glowing windows, laughter drifting out from patios, kids on bikes squealing in the dusk. I'd walk with my earbuds in but no music playing, just silence, just the sound of my own breathing. One night, I passed by a little bookstore I hadn't noticed before. Indigo Fox Books, the window read. I went in. It smelled like cedar and old pages. The woman behind the counter smiled at me in a way no one had in a long time, like I wasn't just a background character. I bought a poetry book, not because I needed it, but because I wanted something quiet, something mine. Back home, I read on the couch until Ethan walked in. He didn't ask what I was reading, just turned on the TV and reached for a snack. We were two ghosts haunting the same house. I wanted to scream, "Do you see me?" Do you know me? Can you even remember what my laugh sounds like? But I didn't, because I already knew the answer. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in years. I spent a full day without texting Ethan once. No updates, no check-ins, no, "Do you want anything from the store?" I woke up early, packed a tote bag with a journal, a water bottle, and that poetry book, and I left. I drove out to the state park an hour away and sat beneath a wide old oak tree near the edge of a trail. It was quiet, except for the birds and the occasional couple walking by. I wrote, "When I stop speaking, who notices?" No one texted, no one called, not even Ethan. And for the first time, that didn't make me sad. It made me free. The strangest part about fading from someone's life is that it doesn't make a sound. There's no crash, no slam, no breaking glass. It happens quietly, like breath fogging up a mirror, slowly disappearing until nothing's left but your own reflection. That's what it felt like, living with Ethan those last few months. I'd sit across from him at dinner and watch him chew while scrolling through emails on his phone. I'd make his coffee the way he used to like it, 2 sugars stirred counterclockwise, but he'd just toss it in the sink and say, "Not in the mood today," like it hadn't taken 10 years of small routines to get us here. He wasn't cruel, he wasn't violent, he was just gone, without ever leaving. Some days I tested it. I'd say something slightly wrong on purpose, about the name of a client or a show we used to watch, and he wouldn't correct me. He wouldn't even notice. Once I told him I might be flying to Denver for work, even though I work fully remote. He just said "cool," without looking up. Another time I left one of my sandals in the fridge on purpose. Nothing. No reaction. He walked right past it, grabbed a can of seltzer, and shut the door. That's when I realized I was becoming like furniture. Something there, present, useful at times, but never seen. Not really. I began pulling back in ways I thought would matter. I stopped asking about his family. I stopped watching the clock for when he'd come home. I stopped folding his laundry. Just left it in the basket and took care of my own. I wanted to know if he'd ask why. He never did. If anything, he seemed relieved. Less talking, less effort. He didn't even question the nights I spent on the couch anymore. At first, I told him I couldn't sleep. Then I stopped offering a reason. I'd just lie there, reading long into the night, letting the sound of the wall clock fill the silence we refused to acknowledge. What surprised me most wasn't his distance, it was how quickly I adjusted to it. I stopped waiting for his attention like a plant reaching for light. Instead, I turned inward. I started waking early, journaling before the sun came up. I wrote about how absence wasn't always about physical space, how sometimes being unseen was more painful than being shouted at. I wrote down everything I couldn't say aloud, that I felt like I was grieving someone who still came home every night. That our home felt like a waiting room, that I didn't know if I was mourning him or mourning who I had become in the marriage. Ethan's family kept inviting us to events, though the invitations became increasingly passive. His mom would send him a quick, "Hey, bring her if she wants" text, or Elise would tag me in a post about a birthday party but never message directly. I noticed the shift. They were all making room for my eventual disappearance, like they'd sensed the unraveling before I'd even packed a single box. I stopped attending. I told Ethan I needed space. He didn't fight me, he just said, "Okay," and left it at that. I think deep down he was grateful not to have to explain my silences anymore, or maybe he didn't notice them at all. I started seeing a therapist once a week. I didn't tell Ethan. I didn't tell anyone. Her office was small, tucked above a bakery, and always smelled like warm honey and cinnamon. I'd sit on the couch and talk about my quiet grief, the kind no one brings flowers for, the kind that grows like mold in the corners of conversations left unsaid. I told her how I used to think love meant holding on no matter what, that loyalty meant endurance, even when it bruised. She asked me something that startled me. "Do you think Ethan even knows you're leaving him?" I blinked. Not because the question was cruel, but because it was true. I had already left in every way that mattered. My body was still there, but my spirit had folded itself inward, waiting for daylight. The apartment listing I bookmarked, the one above the flower shop, was still available. I checked once a day, then twice. Then I emailed the landlord. I didn't commit. I just inquired, but I used a different email address. One Ethan didn't know. The response came back fast. It was furnished, quiet, month to month, a corner unit with a little balcony that faced west. I read the message 3 times, then closed the tab, but something in me had already opened. It felt like possibility. The next week, Ethan asked if I wanted to go to dinner. Just us. No occasion. I hesitated, but I said yes. I think part of me wanted to believe it might still matter. We sat across from each other in a booth at a restaurant we used to love. He ordered the steak. I ordered the same salad I always did. We talked about surface things, the news, gas prices, his work, my work. He told a joke. I smiled. But the whole time, I felt like we were just 2 strangers reenacting a play we'd both forgotten the ending to. After dinner, he drove us home in silence. I stared out the window. I knew he thought things were improving, that the dinner was a reset, but I also knew I had already crossed the emotional border. There was no returning to something that never really saw me in the first place. I couldn't tell him that yet, but I would. Soon. Because emotional invisibility in marriage isn't a phase, it's a forecast, and I was already learning how to walk through the storm alone. They think the moment you leave is the day you pack a bag, the day you slam a door, the day the papers hit the kitchen counter with a signature and a sigh. But for me, the real leaving happened in fragments, one private decision at a time. Quiet divorce planning starts not with a lawyer, but with a journal entry. A drawer cleared, a name removed from an emergency contact list, a thought whispered so softly you almost miss it. I'm not staying. By the time I ordered the prepaid phone, I already knew I wasn't coming back. Not emotionally, not fully. I still smiled at Ethan across the dinner table, still responded when he asked where the towels were, but my heart had already rewritten the locks. I used to believe that staying quiet was noble, that absorbing discomfort without confrontation was some kind of emotional strength. But there's a difference between peacekeeping and self-erasure, and I had been erasing myself for years, letting the loud voices at Ethan's family table talk over mine, letting Elise's sarcasm turn me into the joke, letting Ethan's silence convince me my pain wasn't worth naming. So I stopped explaining. I started planning. The first thing I did was secure the documents: birth certificate, social security card, passport, marriage license. I scanned them, backed them up on a flash drive, and slipped the originals into a manila envelope labeled insurance. No one would look twice. Next came the finances. Ethan and I had a shared account, mostly for bills and groceries. But I had a private account I opened years ago with a tiny freelance writing gig. I started funneling my paychecks there again. Small amounts, not enough to raise flags, just enough to breathe later if I needed to. I bought a new notebook. Not the kind with flowers on the cover or motivational quotes, just plain brown, soft-covered, spiral-bound. I titled it with a single word: Exit. Every page held a plan. What day I'd leave, what time he usually went to the gym, how long it would take to carry 3 boxes to the car, where I'd hide the duffel bag until then. I didn't want chaos. I didn't want a dramatic confrontation. I wanted clarity and the dignity of a clean departure. Ethan had started noticing something, not the boxes, not the new email accounts, but something in my eyes. He asked one evening, "Are you okay? You've seemed different lately." Different, not distant, not done, just different. I nodded and said, "I'm fine, just thinking a lot lately." He smiled, relieved. He took my answer at face value because it was easier than probing. That was Ethan. He only asked questions he already knew the answer to, and I had stopped giving him those answers a long time ago. The night I visited the flower shop apartment for the first time, I told Ethan I was meeting a friend for dinner. He didn't ask who. He didn't even glance up from his laptop. I stood in front of the mirror before I left, wearing jeans, a soft black sweater, and a scarf I hadn't touched in years. I looked light. Not happy, but quieter. Like someone who had finally stopped waiting for permission to feel seen. The landlord was a retired teacher named Mr. Halverson. The apartment smelled like lavender and old wood. The windows let in the late afternoon light in a way that made everything glow. "It's nothing fancy," he said, "but it's peaceful. Good walls, no noise." That's all I wanted. Peace and thick walls. I told him I'd think about it. He said to let him know by Friday. I did more than think. I returned home that night and moved my essentials, not to the apartment, not yet, but into 3 tidy boxes in the back of my closet, labeled with old names like winter coats and towels. Inside were my favorite books, my journal, documents, and clothes I wouldn't cry about leaving behind. I didn't tell a soul. Not my sister, not my therapist, not even the version of me I used to be, the one who thought love meant sacrifice and patience meant silence. That version of me would have wept while packing. This version simply folded her jeans with care. The next morning, Ethan kissed the top of my head before leaving for work. He hadn't done that in months. I wondered if he felt something changing or if it was just routine muscle memory. I didn't flinch. I didn't lean into it either. I spent the rest of that day doing things slowly. I made tea instead of coffee. I answered a few emails. I paid a small balance on a dental bill. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I took a walk without checking in. I didn't leave a note. I didn't bring my phone. I just walked. And with every step, I felt the weight of what I was about to do grow lighter. Not because it wouldn't hurt, but because it had already hurt. Quietly, deeply, and for far too long. Ethan had made dinner that evening. Pasta, my favorite. He smiled, proud, said, "Thought I'd surprise you." I sat down, ate, thanked him, and somewhere between the first and last bite, I decided something final. This was our last shared meal. He didn't know it yet, but I did. The morning I signed the lease, the sky was the clearest it had been in weeks. It was late September, that in-between season when the air still tastes like summer, but the trees have started turning anyway, like they've quietly made up their minds to change, whether the sun agrees or not. I sat in the parking lot of the flower shop apartment with the lease in my hand, the pen hovering for just a second longer than it needed to. It wasn't fear holding me back. It was recognition. Signing didn't just mean new keys. It meant I was done trying to be seen in a place I had gone invisible. I didn't cry. I didn't even sigh. I just signed. I hadn't filed anything official yet. No lawyer, no court date, not even a drafted message. But the truth was, my emotional divorce before the legal one had already happened. It wasn't a dramatic break. It was gradual, like erosion. Little pieces of me worn away until all that remained was a version of myself I no longer recognized, one who smiled politely, who answered when spoken to, who folded Ethan's t-shirts because silence was easier than asking, "Why do I still care if they wrinkle?" When I returned home that evening, Ethan was watching a documentary. He didn't hear me come in. I stood in the hallway for a while, just listening. The soft hum of the TV, the occasional clink of his spoon in a bowl of cereal, the faint buzz of a notification on his phone. He looked peaceful, like a man without a worry in the world, like a man who still believed he was married in all the ways that mattered. And maybe he was, just not to the version of me that existed now. We were roommates with wedding rings, partners in errands and plumbing issues, strangers who shared a mortgage and exchanged lukewarm goodnights. There was no affection, no fighting either, just a grayness that settled over us like dust on forgotten shelves. Every once in a while, I'd catch him looking at me across the table like he was trying to remember a password from years ago. But he never asked, and I never reminded him who I used to be. I began visiting the new apartment in secret, one box at a time. I brought small things first, my books, my favorite teacup, the fleece blanket my grandmother gave me in college. I hung one framed photo on the wall, a picture of me alone at a beach, hair windblown, smiling at nothing. It had been taken 3 years before I met Ethan, before I started asking for someone else's permission to matter. The space felt honest, sparse, but not sad. I liked the way the floor creaked under my feet, the way the air carried the scent of fresh-cut stems from downstairs. The silence there wasn't the kind that suffocated. It breathed. Back home, things stayed routine. Ethan made dinner twice that week. One night he brought home takeout from my favorite Thai place. He said, "Thought you might like a break." I thanked him, smiled even. But I didn't eat much. My appetite for pretending had shrunk. He noticed. "You're always somewhere else lately," he said quietly. "Is everything okay?" It would have been so easy to say yes. To soften the truth, delay the fallout, spare us both the mess. But I had passed that threshold months ago. The time for pretending had expired. "No," I said. "It's not." He looked confused. Not angry. Not defensive. Just bewildered, like he couldn't figure out when exactly the light switch had flipped. And I couldn't blame him. Because emotional neglect doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with absence. With years of not asking, not noticing, not reaching back when the other person reaches out. We sat in silence after that. The takeout grew cold between us. And in that silence, I think he finally felt the divorce I had been living long before that night. Later, while he was in the shower, I walked to the bedroom and opened the drawer where I kept my duffel bag. I placed inside it the last few things I hadn't already moved: a set of clean clothes, my journal, the watch he gave me on our 3rd anniversary. I didn't take much, just enough to feel like myself again. When he came to bed, I was already lying down, eyes closed. He didn't say goodnight. Neither did I. The next morning, I left the apartment keys in an envelope on the kitchen counter. I didn't leave a note. I didn't need to. The absence would say everything. I drove to the flower shop apartment and unlocked the door with a new set of keys. The air was cool, the windows were open, and for the first time in years, the quiet around me didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like peace. I made tea. I sat on the small balcony with my notebook, and I wrote, "I left before I ever walked out. This is just the part he can finally see." The legal work would come later. Papers, signatures, closure in the eyes of the state. But for me, the marriage had ended long before. And it didn't end in a fight. It ended in a room full of people where no one noticed I was gone. I thought the loneliness would follow me. I had imagined that first night alone in the new apartment would echo with doubt, that I'd miss the sound of another person breathing nearby, or that I'd reach out in my sleep for someone who was no longer beside me. But I didn't. What came instead was stillness. Real stillness. Not the kind you sit in because someone has gone cold on you, but the kind that lets your lungs fill fully for the first time in years. That first morning in the flower shop apartment, I woke up with sunlight falling across my collarbone and no one asking what was for breakfast or if I remembered to pay the water bill. I just breathed, in and out, slowly. That was the start of healing after emotional abandonment. Not a grand moment, but a quiet one. One breath, finally my own. I spent the first week learning how to live again without tiptoeing. I played music without earbuds. I walked barefoot across the old wood floors without worrying if it was too loud. I didn't wear makeup. I didn't pretend to like shows I didn't like. I sat with myself, awkward at first, like getting reacquainted with an old friend, but it got easier. I learned the rhythms of solitude, and they weren't empty. They were mine. There were hard moments, of course. The second time I bought groceries alone, I reached for Ethan's favorite cereal out of habit. I stared at the box for a moment before setting it back down. Another day, I passed a couple at the park, holding hands, laughing at some private joke, and I felt that familiar sting. Not because I missed Ethan, but because I missed what I used to believe love looked like. It took me a while to realize I didn't miss him. I missed the version of me who still believed he saw me, but healing meant honoring that woman too, not just the one who walked away. She tried. She gave everything. She stayed longer than she should have because she believed love meant endurance. She held the line until her fingers bled, and when she was finally too tired to hold it anymore, she let go with grace. I didn't erase her. I thanked her, and I let her rest. The emails from Ethan started slowly. 1, then 2. Each one more tentative than the last. He wasn't angry. He was confused. "I didn't see this coming," one message read. "I thought we were okay." Another said, I wish you'd said something sooner. I read them, but I didn't respond. Because the truth is, I had said something. For years. I said it every time I reached for him and got silence, every time I asked for help and got a shrug, every time I sat at his mother's table and listened to Elise make jokes at my expense while he looked away. Silence, I've learned, isn't the absence of communication. It is communication. And mine had been loud for a very long time. The real surprise came 3 weeks later when he knocked on the apartment door. I hadn't given him the address, but I assumed he asked someone in the family. I didn't answer at first. I just watched through the peephole as he shifted his weight from foot to foot, holding something in his hand. A small box. When I finally opened the door, I didn't greet him. I just stood there, calm, waiting. He looked thinner, tired, not devastated, just weathered. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, he said. Not for what I did, but for what I didn't do, for what I ignored. I nodded. Let the silence sit between us. It wasn't awkward. It was necessary. I know you won't come back, he added quietly. I just needed to say it. I glanced at the box. He held it out. It's some of your things, he said. Photos, a scarf, that book of poems you left behind. I took the box, not for him, but for me. Then I said the one thing I'd been holding in my chest since the day I left. I don't hate you, but I no longer hurt myself to love you. He blinked, then nodded slowly, and just like that, he walked away. I stood at the door until his figure disappeared, not because I wanted him to stay, but because I needed to witness my own peace arriving. That night, I opened the box. Inside were a few prints from a road trip we took early in the marriage, a seashell from the beach in Carmel, a folded receipt from the day we bought our first couch. I smiled, not because I wanted those moments back, but because I finally understood what they were, good things that didn't last. And that's okay. Somewhere in the months that followed, I stopped checking to see if he'd emailed. I stopped talking about him in therapy as if he were the center of the story. I started using his name less and mine more. I joined a book club. I hosted a dinner for 3 women I hadn't seen in years. I cooked things he never liked. I listened to my own laughter echo back and thought, this is what being heard feels like. I never filed for revenge, never posted a public explanation, never lit anything on fire or scrawled a goodbye on the walls. I simply lived, healed, became whole again. Some goodbyes don't come with a slammed door. They come with a gentle pull inward when you finally decide to stop waiting for someone to choose you. Healing after emotional abandonment isn't about being found. It's about no longer needing to be. You do not need recognition to be worthy. Your worth is in how you walk away. If you saw yourself in this story, hit subscribe to keep hearing kindness echo after heartbreak.